It is not uncommon to hear of high-profile white-collar frauds in the corporate world. As a matter of fact, in the last couple of decades, humanity has been served a basket full of them, ranging from the older Ivan Boesky insider trading fraud to the infamous Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme, down to the more recent FTX scandal. However, it is not every day that we hear of a single family been blamed for the demise of a company as a direct result of not just fraud, but also internal rivalries, jealousies, and infighting among family members. This particular fraud story that went on for 18 good years may appear smaller and softer than recent multi-billion-dollar frauds, such as those I just mentioned in passing a while ago. The following crime spree, however, is a fascinating case study of the various tactics of deception that white-collar criminals habitually engage in. The evolution of the crime tale demonstrates how minor, easily rationalized criminal violations can evolve into significant and intricate frauds and conspiracies with no regard for morals, ethics, or justice. This is the story of a once popular company which almost got away with its acts of skimming profits, evading taxes, defrauding investors, and falsifying financial reports, but which at the tail end got caught up in its own mess, resulting in its tragic collapse. This is the too crazy story of Crazy Eddie. Crazy Eddie was a consumer electronics chain in the northeastern United States whose original predecessor was ERS Electronics, which was created in 1969 by Eddie Antar, Sam M. Antar, Eddie's father, and Ronnie Gindy, a first cousin. Eddie, Ronnie, and Sam M. each owned 1/3 of ERS Electronics. Sight and Sound was the name under which the company operated. Sight and Sounds was in a severe legal battle with manufacturers over fair trade practices in 1970, and the company was losing money. Fair trade practices were actions conducted in accordance with fair trade laws, which permitted manufacturers to oblige retailers to sell things at the same price in order to eliminate price rivalry for their products. These laws were having a negative impact on many smaller retailers, such as Crazy Eddie, who, despite having lower overheads than the larger chain store retailers, were unable to compete by lowering prices. Now, back to the legal dispute. Ronnie Gindy was skeptical that the company would win its legal battle and become successful in the future. Mr. Gindy sold his 1/3 stake in ERS to Eddie Antar, who then controlled 2/3 of the company. Eddie Antar's majority ownership of ERS paved the way for future feuds between him, his father, and the rest of his immediate family. More on how this family feud contributed to Crazy Eddie's downfall later. Even though the fair trade law was eventually repealed in 1972, Eddie had discovered a way to circumvent the law a year earlier by resorting to discounting merchandise to customers and buying merchandise from overseas manufacturers. Ultimately, this sales tactic would result in manufacturers refusing to sell Sights and Sounds any products in retaliation for Eddie's actions. This was also Eddie's strategy that earned him the nickname Crazy. Eddie Antar then changed the name of his company to Crazy Eddie. Eddie Antar, also known as the retailing revolutionary, expanded the company tremendously by opening up more stores and engaging in a series of memorable advertising blitzes.
Yes, Crazy Eddie's Edison, New Jersey grand opening is going on right now through Sunday. Thousands of free Crazy Eddie t-shirts and baseball caps, and all great Crazy Eddie superstores are celebrating during Crazy Eddie's grand opening blowout blitz. So come on down to Edison, New Jersey. Thousands of free Crazy Eddie t-shirts and baseball caps. Let Crazy Eddie light up your life with prices that are insane.
At its peak, Crazy Eddie had 43 stores in 4 states and reported more than $300 million in sales. But behind all this success and popularity was a family engaged in a series of financial deceit and fraud. Crazy Eddie's wave of crime, which included scheming profits, exaggerating insurance losses, evading taxes, defrauding investors, and falsifying financial reports, progressed in 3 phases. This first phase lasted from 1969 through 1979. Crazy Eddie's primary frauds as a private company were tax evasion, where the company skimmed cash sales from clients in order to evade income and sales taxes; avoiding payroll taxes by paying employees in cash off the books rather than reporting revenue to the IRS, and making false or exaggerated insurance claims in order to increase profits. The majority of these complex financial scams would not have been conceivable without the assistance of an accounting specialist. And this is when Eddie Antar's cousin enters into the picture in 1971. Sam E. Antar, or Sammy as he was affectionately called, was literally groomed by the Antar family, to which he belongs, to spearhead and orchestrate the family's crimes. While he was in college, his family covered his tuition and full-time salary. Crazy Eddie's top management reasoned that by going public, they would be able to make additional illicit profits by issuing shares at inflated prices to unsuspecting victims. This would be more profitable than skimming cash sales, evading taxes, and paying employees off the books. As a public company, they expected to receive better value for money by inflating earnings. This phase lasted from 1980 to 1984. By this time, Sammy had finished his studies, and the Antars were ready to capitalize on his accounting knowledge by appointing him as Crazy Eddie's de facto chief financial officer. This position enabled him to carry out more complex crimes on behalf of the family. By this time, the company had gradually reduced skimming in order to maximize profit growth in preparation for the IPO initial public offering. That is, committing securities fraud by going legit, in quotes. Around 1980, Sammy would assist in the development of a plan that would progressively lower Crazy Eddie's skimming from around $3 million per year in 1979 to almost nothing in 1984, while falsely raising reported profit growth. When the corporation gradually curtailed its skimming, it no longer had the ability to pay its employees in cash or off the books. As a result, all employees were required to be paid by check or on the books, and their full income had to be reported to the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service. Employees were now obligated to pay both payroll and income taxes, while the company was forced to pay its portion of payroll taxes. Even though external auditors observed that many employees who had previously been paid what appeared to be extremely low wages, considering their positions and responsibilities, had received raises in multiples of 3 to as many as 20 times their previously reported salaries, the auditors were unaware that Crazy Eddie management was grossing up their employees' total check compensation to make up for the loss of off-the-books compensation. The naive auditors accepted their ridiculous explanation that the employees had worked for many years at below-average wages in order to be a part of what they anticipated would become a thriving public company. Pro forma yearly profits increased from $1.7 million in 1980 to $8 million in 1984 during this phase. Without the reduction in skimming, Crazy Eddie's pro forma profits only grew from $4.7 million to $8 million in the same time frame. These false financial records would provide the image of a flourishing, growing company, misleading investors into purchasing shares when the company went public. Then followed the third phase of their fraud, which took place between 1984 and 1987. It's Thursday, September 13th, 1984. Crazy Eddie finally goes public for the first time. Investors quickly snatch up 1.7 million of the company's newly issued shares at $8 apiece. And by 1986, Crazy Eddie stock was trading for more than $75 per share. Crazy Eddie, as a public corporation, overstated revenue to assist insiders in selling stock at inflated prices using a variety of fraudulent schemes. Like the Panama Pump money laundering scheme, where cash skimmed from Crazy Eddie before it went public and deposited in Israeli banks was moved to bank accounts in Panama. These accounts, which were formed under fictitious identities, drafted payments to Crazy Eddie. This money was mostly used to boost the company's income. They also employed deceptive asset valuation techniques, such as overstating inventory assets to minimize cost of goods sold and hence inflate reported earnings. And also understated accounts payable to inflate reported profits through what is known as accounts payable cutoff fraud. where inventory that was received by Crazy Eddie before the end of the accounting period was invoiced by suppliers and reflected as shipped to the company in the subsequent accounting period. Similar to that was the debit memo fraud, which also involved understating of accounts payable to inflate reported profits. But in this case, Crazy Eddie claimed fictitious purchase discounts and trade allowances to understate accounts payable and inflate reported profits. By this time, things just weren't going as smoothly in the family as one would have expected of a family making so much money. Behind the curtains, there was a quiet family rift that was slowly tearing the family apart, and as we would later learn, would be directly responsible for the fall of Crazy Eddie. The family rift was basically born out of jealousy towards Eddie's success. When Ronnie Gindy, Eddie's first cousin, who initially owned a third of the shares of ERS, sold his shares to Eddie, Eddie became the company's biggest shareholder, as he could now control 2/3 of ERS. Eddie Antar's majority ownership of ERS made him richer than his father, and this, in turn, paved the way for future conflicts between him, his father, and the rest of his immediate family. The height of Eddie's father's venting out his jealousy towards the son was when he and Eddie's two brothers, Mitchell and Alan, sent Arnold Spindler and Abe Grinberg, former workers of Crazy Eddie, who were both fired by Eddie, to report Eddie's fraud schemes to the SEC, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, as a way to get revenge on Eddie for throwing them out of the company. However, they completely covered up the involvement of Eddie's father and his other allies in the Antar clan. They skillfully did this by not mentioning the skimming of cash part of Eddie's fraud. If the government found out about the skimming, it could bring down both warring factions of the Antar clan. Eddie was eventually unable to sustain his deceptive business practices, so he cashed in millions of dollars in stock and quit in December 1986. Crazy Eddie began to lose money around this period. They'd never been in the red before, but consumer electronics prices were falling as competition intensified. Eddie became concerned that someone would take over the company and expose the fraud, so he bid $7 per share to take Crazy Eddie private in May 1987, but a hedge fund decided it must be a gold mine and bid $8. Crazy Eddie was taken up by new owners in November 1987, and the rest of the Antars were fired. 2 weeks later, the new management made a physical inventory of all warehouses and stores and discovered that $40 million in inventory did not exist. This prompted investigations by multiple authorities, including the FBI, the IRS, and the SEC. The company was forced to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy that summer, and all remaining stores were liquidated and closed. In March of 1989, Sammy struck a deal with the feds. Until then, they only knew about the securities fraud when income was inflated from 1984 to 87. They hadn't yet uncovered the Panama pump, the skimming, or the reduction of skimming prior to the company going public. On September 6, 1989, the SEC accused Eddie Antar with securities fraud and illegal insider trading based on facts acquired throughout its investigation. And he was required to return $50 million that he had unlawfully smuggled to Israel. A federal judge summoned him twice to appear in court, but he never did. Eddie Antar skipped town and departed the country in February 1990 rather than comply with the court order. Eddie Antar was apprehended in Israel in June 1992. Mitchell and Alan Antar were also arrested the same day by FBI investigators. Due to substantial document destruction and statute of limitations issues, there was insufficient evidence to file criminal charges against Eddie's father, Ben Kuzer, and other family members. Instead, the SEC filed civil suits against them in order to collect ill-gotten gains. In May 1996, Eddie Antar pled guilty to federal fraud charges. He was condemned to 8 years in jail in February 1997. In addition to the more than $1 billion in judgments against him from numerous civil proceedings, he was compelled to pay more than $150 million in fines. In 2012, efforts were undertaken to recover additional funds from the Antar family on behalf of misled stockholders. Eddie Antar died at the age of 68 on September 10, 2016. His death was dubbed the end of an era. And this story was all about profits and deceits. If you enjoyed this video and would want to see stuffs like this and much more, definitely consider subscribing to this channel. If you want to see my last video on the American oil mogul who sold his soul to become a billionaire, I will leave a link to that in the description. Thank you for watching this episode. Until the next one, see you around.